The wind screamed across the snow-laden plains like 1,000 wild horses stampeding in the dark. White sheets of snow whipped her face, stinging with a cold so sharp it felt as though it could slice through skin. Every step she took was a battle. The ground, once solid underfoot, had transformed into a shifting, treacherous expanse, hiding icy holes that threatened to swallow her with every misstep. Her fingers, stiff and numb despite her thick gloves, clutched at the strap of her pack, trying desperately to keep hold of the few supplies that could mean the difference between life and death. She had been traveling alone for days, hoping to reach the next settlement before the first heavy snowfall trapped her in the wilderness. But the storm had come faster than expected, rolling over the mountains and plains like an unstoppable tide. Now, caught in its fury, she realized just how small and vulnerable she truly was. The sky had vanished into a blinding white haze, and the world around her had become unrecognizable. Trees were obscured by the swirling snow. Rocks were hidden beneath thick drifts. Even the path she had memorized days earlier seemed to have disappeared entirely. Her breaths came in harsh, visible bursts. Each inhalation burned her lungs, and every exhale was instantly snatched away by the biting wind. The cold crept into her bones, settling there, relentless and unyielding. She stumbled over a hidden mound of snow and fell face first, coughing and gasping. For a moment, the thought that perhaps she wouldn't make it crossed her mind. She tried to push away, but the icy fingers of reality kept tugging at her dot. Her pack contained the bare necessities: a small amount of dried meat, a flask of water, and a threadbare blanket. Nothing could keep her warm for long, not against this storm. Her fingers trembled as she unzipped the pack and pulled out the blanket, wrapping it around her shoulders. She had tried to ration her supplies, but hunger gnawed at her stomach, and the cold made every ounce of energy precious. She knew that if she stayed in the open much longer, the frostbite would claim her fingers, then her toes, and eventually everything else. Desperation began to creep in. She thought about the animals she had seen along the trail, struggling to find shelter and warmth. Her heart ached for them, and yet she realized she might not survive to help them. The storm seemed almost alive, pressing in from all sides, a force of nature that would accept no compromise. And then came the idea, the one she hoped she would never have to act upon: sacrifice. If she gave up now, if she allowed herself to slip into the snow, leaving the few supplies behind, perhaps she could preserve something for another soul. Perhaps she could save herself in some other way, though the thought of ending her own life made her stomach churn. She stopped and looked around. The world was a blur of white, movement, and sound, the blizzard turning everything familiar into a shifting nightmare. Each second was a struggle to keep moving forward, to stay alive. Her mind raced, grappling with fear, with the cruel knowledge of her own mortality. She shivered violently, teeth chattering, and pressed on, knowing that pause might mean her end. Every step felt heavier than the last, every gust of wind threatening to knock her down. And then, through the howling snow, a shadow appeared in the distance. At first, she thought it was a trick of the storm, a mirage conjured by her exhausted mind. But as the figure drew closer, the outlines became clear. Someone was there, moving steadily through the blizzard, seemingly unaffected by the cold or the wind. Her heart leaped. Could it be another traveler, a rescuer? The storm had seemed unbeatable, yet this stranger came as if it had no power at all over him. Relief and curiosity mixed with suspicion. She took a trembling step forward, wondering if, just maybe, she had been saved from the fate she had so desperately considered. The wind showed no mercy. Snow lashed at her face with unrelenting force, and every step felt like wading through icy quicksand. Her body trembled violently, not just from the cold but from sheer exhaustion. Muscles cramped with every movement, and her lungs burned with the effort of forcing air into her freezing chest. She had been walking for hours, or was it days? Time seemed meaningless in the storm. The world had narrowed down to a single desperate thought: survival. But survival was slipping through her fingers. Her hands were numb, fingers stiff and swollen. Her feet, soaked through despite the thick boots, felt like they were turning to ice. She stumbled over a hidden mound, falling into the snow with a grunt that was swallowed instantly by the howling wind. Her breath came in ragged gasps, each one feeling like it might be her last. She could feel frost creeping along her cheeks, her ears, and her nose. She wrapped the threadbare blanket tighter around herself, but it did little more than scratch the surface of the relentless cold. Her mind spun, circling back to a thought she had tried to ignore, the thought of giving up. Not in a romantic or heroic sense, this was survival stripped to its rawest, cruelest edges. She thought of leaving her few supplies behind, destroying them to prevent them from being wasted, and allowing herself to sink into the snow to let the storm claim her as it had claimed so many others before. She imagined the pain fading, the endless cold giving way to silence. Perhaps it would be easier this way. The wind seemed to sense her hesitation, whipping with renewed fury as if mocking her. Every instinct screamed at her to move forward, to keep fighting, but her body was failing her. She stumbled again, sliding into a drift that swallowed her almost entirely. Snow pressed into her eyes and mouth, filling her lungs with ice. Panic surged. She clawed herself free, shaking her head to clear the blinding snow. She could feel the cold gnawing at her bones, a slow, insidious erosion of life itself. She thought of the animal she had tried to help along the trail, a lone rabbit huddled under a bush, birds struggling to find shelter. Even in her desperation, a pang of guilt twisted her heart. She had come this far, fought so hard, and yet here she was, ready to surrender. She pressed the blanket tighter around her shoulders, rocking slightly as if it could somehow shield her from the storm, and from the unbearable truth: she could die out here alone. She made a decision. If survival meant surrendering to the storm, then perhaps surrender was what she would do, but on her own terms. She would leave the tent behind, abandon the little food she had scavenged, and accept the storm as a force beyond her control. She crouched low, her teeth chattering uncontrollably, and began to dig a small depression in the snow with her hands, hoping to shield herself just enough to hold off the cold for a few more hours or minutes. She whispered a quiet apology to the world, to the animals, to herself. This was not bravery. This was despair. And then, just as her body began to give way entirely, a shadow moved through the snow. At first, she thought it was a mirage, a cruel trick of her frost-bitten mind. But the figure drew closer, steady and deliberate. He was tall, cloaked in furs that seemed to defy the wind, moving with a confidence born of knowledge she could not fathom. She blinked, unsure whether to trust her eyes or to accept the storm's cruel joke. The man stopped before her, surveying her shivering form. His eyes, dark and piercing, took in her frozen state and the futile attempt she had made to hide from the storm. Without a word, he shook his head slowly and with a calm yet commanding tone said, "Not this way." Her breath caught. Someone alive and capable had found her at the edge of death. In that instant, the desperate decision she had made, the surrender she thought inevitable, began to feel like a mistake. The storm had not yet released its grip, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope, fragile and trembling. That maybe, just maybe, survival did not have to mean sacrifice after all. Through the blinding sheets of snow, the figure grew clearer, though still shrouded in the swirling storm. The woman's heart pounded violently, each beat echoing the fragility of her own survival. She had expected the blizzard to be her undoing, and yet here, moving steadily and unflinchingly through the chaos, was someone alive, warm, and entirely human. He advanced with a calm that defied the raging elements, every step purposeful, as though the wind and snow parted for him out of sheer respect. She blinked through the icy lashes of snow, trying to discern details. He was tall, broad-shouldered, wrapped in heavy furs that seemed to shimmer with a subtle, natural resilience. His boots sank into the snow, yet he moved without struggle, navigating the frozen landscape as though he belonged entirely to it. There was a quiet authority in the way he carried himself, an instinctive knowledge of the wild that her own frantic, panicked motions lacked. The woman tried to speak, but her teeth chattered uncontrollably. Her voice came out as a rasp, swallowed almost instantly by the howling wind. She waved a trembling hand, hoping to attract his attention, fearing that if she faltered for even a moment, the storm would snatch her from the world entirely. The figure stopped a few feet away, dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that pierced the blizzard's veil. He surveyed her, taking in her frozen limbs, the threadbare blanket clutched desperately around her shoulders, the hollow look of fear and exhaustion in her gaze. There was no judgment in his eyes, only an unspoken acknowledgment of the struggle she had endured. Then he spoke. His voice was calm, deep, carrying over the roar of the wind in a way that was both commanding and reassuring. "Not this way," he said, his words carrying a weight that made her shiver, not from cold, but from a sudden surge of relief and awe. He reached toward her, gloved hand steady and sure, and gently helped her to her feet. She leaned on him instinctively, clinging to the warmth and security. He seemed to radiate even in the blizzard's fury. He guided her through the storm with a confidence that amazed her. Every step was deliberate, every motion precise. He navigated hidden drifts, avoided treacherous ice patches, and steered her toward subtle landmarks that were invisible to her frantic eyes. The world had become a monochrome of white, yet he moved as if he could read its secrets like an open book. She stumbled, once, twice, her legs threatening to give out entirely, but his strong grip kept her upright. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, they reached a hollow tucked against the side of a rocky ridge, partially shielded from the wind. The snow had formed natural walls, creating a small refuge from the blizzard. He knelt and carefully inspected the hollow, then gestured for her to enter. Inside, the air was still, and the storm's roar was muffled, though the cold remained sharp. He set down her pack and crouched near her, carefully removing a small piece of cloth from his furs. He began to show her how to create a rudimentary shelter, using the snow itself as insulation, pressing and shaping it to block the wind. She watched in awe as he worked, realizing that survival did not have to mean surrender. The techniques he used were unfamiliar but ingenious. He demonstrated ways to conserve heat, maintain warmth, and protect against frostbite using nothing but natural materials and knowledge passed down through generations. As he worked, she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper, Who are you?" He looked at her, eyes dark and steady, and replied simply, "Someone who knows the ways of this land, and someone who will not let you die like this, not this way." For the first time since the storm began, she felt the icy grip of hopelessness loosen. The figure before her was more than a rescuer. He was a guide, a protector, a bridge between despair and survival. And in the frozen silence of the blizzard, a fragile seed of trust and hope began to take root. The woman huddled in the small hollow, shivering beneath the threadbare blanket she had clutched so desperately. The storm still howled outside, battering the natural walls he had helped create, but inside, the air was almost still. For the first time in hours, maybe days, she could hear her own ragged breathing and feel the blood pulsing in her frozen fingers. The figure, this mysterious Apache, sat across from her, inspecting the hollow with quiet, careful movements, as if every detail mattered. He looked at her with a mixture of patience and sternness. His eyes, dark and piercing, seemed to see far beyond her exhausted, frozen exterior. "You came close to surrendering," he said softly, yet the weight of the words made her flinch. "To let the storm take you, that is not the way of survival." Her throat tightened, shame and fear coiling together. She wanted to speak, to explain, but words failed her. The realization that she had truly considered giving up the decision she thought might save her or someone else hit her like the icy wind outside. She had been so desperate, so convinced that death was inevitable, that she had allowed herself to even think of surrender. And now here he was, telling her it wasn't the solution. He reached into his furs and pulled out a small, weathered knife. Its blade was sharp but simple, its handle wrapped in strips of leather worn smooth with use. With meticulous movements, he demonstrated how to carefully carve channels into the snow to direct wind away from their shelter. He showed her how to compact the snow to act as insulation, how to preserve body heat, and how to use small embers to maintain a fire without letting it die. She watched, fascinated and humbled. Every action he took was deliberate, measured, and clearly learned from a lifetime of experience. Survival, she realized, wasn't about brute force or sheer luck. It was about knowledge, patience, and respect for the elements. "You thought giving up would save you," he said, his voice calm but edged with authority. "But surrender is not strength. It is weakness. The storm will take what it can, yes, but it will respect those who respect it in return. You must adapt, not yield." Her gaze dropped to her frozen hands. She felt shame mixed with awe. He was right. She had allowed fear to dictate her actions, to cloud her judgment. Survival was not about surrendering to hopelessness. It was about understanding the storm, reading its patterns, and working with it instead of against it. He moved closer, pressing a small bundle of dried herbs and tinder into her hands. "These will help sustain you. Learn to use what you have wisely. Waste nothing. Respect the land, respect your body, and respect life." The words seemed to echo beyond the hollow, carrying a weight that transcended the immediate danger. They were not just instructions, they were a philosophy, a code of living even in the harshest conditions. The woman nodded, shivering less now, though her body was still weak. She began to mimic his movements, carving channels into the snow, shaping the hollow, and arranging materials for warmth. Every action she took reinforced a growing sense of control, a fragile but vital confidence. She was no longer simply surviving. She was learning to master the environment, to bend it to her advantage without denying its power. He watched her closely, offering corrections, encouragement, and silent approval. "You will survive this storm," he said finally, his eyes meeting hers. "But only if you remember this. Survival is never surrender. Never this way." She absorbed his words, letting them anchor her like the walls of the hollow against the howling wind outside. For the first time, hope felt real, tangible, and achievable. She realized that she had been on the brink, teetering between life and death, and that her path forward required more than desperation. It required learning, adaptation, and trust. And for the first time since the blizzard began, she felt that she might live, not just to see another day, but to truly survive it. The blizzard raged outside, a relentless roar that seemed determined to erase everything in its path. Yet inside the hollow, a fragile sense of order began to emerge. The woman worked alongside the Apache, mimicking his careful movements, though each motion felt foreign and awkward at first. He moved with a natural grace and efficiency, his hands steady even in the biting cold, while hers trembled as she tried to follow his instructions. Yet with every small success, the fire that stubbornly refused to die, the snow channels that held back the wind, The makeshift insulation that kept some warmth in, she began to feel a spark of confidence. She had thought lost forever. He showed her how to read the snow, how to notice subtle shifts in its texture and color, indicating hidden drifts or weak patches beneath her feet. He taught her to feel the wind, to understand its rhythm and direction, and to use it to their advantage. She learned to preserve body heat by careful movement and strategic positioning. And she discovered how to ration the tiny supplies they had, stretching a small flask of water and a handful of dried meat into enough to sustain them both. Each lesson was a revelation, and though her muscles ached and her body protested, she absorbed every word with desperate determination. At first, she faltered constantly. Her hands shook while trying to start a fire. Her attempts at building windbreaks often collapsed under the pressure of the storm. Her footing on the icy ground was unstable, sending her sliding into small snowdrifts. Each failure brought frustration, and a flicker of the old despair she had felt in the storm's first hours returned. But he did not scold her. Instead, he demonstrated patience that was almost unnatural, offering guidance without judgment, correcting mistakes with quiet encouragement. "Slow," he would say. "Observe, learn, adapt." As hours passed, she began to notice small victories. The fire no longer sputtered out at the first gust of wind. The hollow became increasingly secure against the storm. Her movements became steadier, more confident. She realized she could survive, not through luck or desperation, but through skill and knowledge. Every action he had taught her was a lifeline, every lesson a shield against the storm's relentless cruelty. While they worked, the Apache shared more than technique, he shared philosophy. He spoke of the land of the snow, of survival not as a battle against nature, but as a delicate dance with it. "Respect," he said, "is the difference between life and death. The storm is neither enemy nor friend, it is a test. Those who adapt, who respect it, endure." His words sank deep, reshaping the way she understood the world around her. She realized that survival was not a matter of brute force but of harmony with the elements, of understanding her limits and the ways to extend them. The storm's intensity never lessened, but within the hollow, a quiet rhythm emerged. She moved with purpose, replicating his motions with growing precision. Each success built her confidence. Each corrected mistake reinforced her trust in his guidance. The fear that had once gripped her so tightly began to loosen its hold. She was learning not only to endure the storm but to engage with it, to transform terror into strategy, weakness into strength. As night approached, the hollow became a small fortress of warmth and safety. He taught her how to preserve the fire overnight, how to arrange their bodies for maximum heat retention, and how to conserve energy for the journey ahead. She marveled at the simplicity and effectiveness of his methods, realizing how close she had come to succumbing to her own panic and despair. By the time darkness fully settled, she was exhausted, but a new sense of determination had taken root. For the first time, she felt like she had a real chance at surviving the blizzard. More importantly, she understood that survival was about more than avoiding death. It was about learning, adapting, and trusting in the knowledge and skill that could turn even a deadly storm into a challenge she could meet. She looked at the Apache, his dark eyes calm and watchful, and silently acknowledged the debt she already owed him. He had not just saved her body, he had begun to save her spirit. The blizzard had not relented. Hours stretched into a day, and though the hollow provided some shelter, it could not shield them from the ceaseless fury outside. The wind howled like a living beast, rattling against the snow walls, forcing her to huddle closer to the Apache, seeking warmth and reassurance. Her body ached in ways she had never known, frost-nipped fingers, stiff muscles, and a deep, bone-chilling cold that no blanket could fully banish. Yet the storm demanded more than physical endurance. It demanded vigilance, adaptability, and cooperation. They moved together, navigating the frozen landscape in careful, deliberate steps. Every movement required coordination. She had to trust him completely, while he had to remain aware of her limits. One misstep could send them both plunging into a hidden drift or trap her in a thin patch of ice. The snow was deceptive, hiding cracks, weak snow bridges over frozen streams, and treacherous slopes. Each obstacle was a test, not just of skill but of trust. At one point, she nearly slipped off an icy ledge, her foot sliding toward the edge as the wind threatened to knock her off balance. Instinctively, he caught her, gripping her arm with strength and precision that left no room for doubt. His voice, calm but firm, cut through the roaring storm. Watch the snow. Feel it under your feet. Move with it, not against it. She swallowed hard, gratitude and fear mixing in her chest, and adjusted her footing as he guided her across the treacherous terrain. The storm pressed on relentlessly, bringing with it not only wind and snow, but the mental strain of isolation and exhaustion. Each hour blurred into the next, and she could feel the edges of panic returning, whispering in her mind that survival was still uncertain. The Apache, sensing her growing tension, slowed his pace and encouraged brief pauses, showing her how to conserve energy while maintaining awareness. They shared small bites of dried meat and sips of water, each mouthful a precious reminder that they were still alive, still capable. As the day wore on, he shared fragments of his own experiences surviving similar storms. He spoke of lost companions, of blizzards that had swallowed entire herds of animals, of lessons learned in the harshest of winters. She listened, enraptured, feeling a growing respect not just for his knowledge but for his resilience. He had faced death many times, and yet here he was steady, unwavering, a living testament to endurance. But survival was not only about physical skill. It was about mindset. She learned that fear could paralyze as effectively as frostbite could immobilize. Each time she faltered, he reminded her to breathe, to focus, to observe rather than react. Slowly, she internalized these lessons. She began to move with more confidence, her eyes scanning the snow for hidden threats, her body responding to subtle shifts in terrain and wind. Despite their growing competence, the storm revealed its cruel unpredictability. A sudden shift in the wind sent a wave of snow cascading over a ridge, burying part of their carefully constructed path. They worked together to dig out a new route, sharing the labor and offering support when one faltered. Every small victory reinforced their partnership. Every challenge forged an unspoken bond. By nightfall, the storm's roar continued, but their hollow offered a fragile sanctuary. She huddled against him, exhausted yet alive, feeling a profound gratitude. He had not only guided her through the snow, but had taught her to face fear with discipline and courage. She realized that survival was no longer a solitary struggle, it was shared, a dance of trust, skill, and unspoken understanding. In the frozen silence between gusts of wind, she finally understood the weight of his earlier words, "Not this way." She had almost given up, but together they had endured. For the first time since the blizzard began, she felt not just relief but a growing strength. Survival was no longer about desperate, panicked decisions. It was about perseverance, learning, and the quiet power of companionship in the face of nature's fury. As the storm raged on outside, the hollow felt almost like a cocoon, small, quiet, and oddly protective. The woman sat huddled close to the fire, the warmth seeping slowly into her frozen limbs. She had come far from the panicked, desperate traveler she had been just days ago. Under the Apache's guidance, she had learned not only to survive but to endure with awareness and control. Yet there was something more she longed to understand about him, about the depth of knowledge, strength, and patience he wielded so effortlessly. Breaking the silence, she finally asked, her voice tentative but curious. How? How did you learn all this? How have you survived storms like this before? He looked into the fire for a long moment, the flickering flames reflecting in his dark eyes. Then, slowly he began to speak, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight that demanded attention. Many years ago, he said, I lost my family to the winter. A blizzard like this one. We were caught unaware, and I was the only one left. I watched helpless as the snow claimed those I loved. Her heart tightened at his words, and she drew her blanket closer around herself. There was no bitterness in his voice, only a quiet, somber acceptance. He continued, From that day, I swore I would never allow myself or anyone under my guidance to face such death unprepared. I learned every technique, every way the wind moves, how snow covers the land where danger hides beneath the ice. The storm is merciless, but knowledge, respect, and vigilance can tip the balance. He paused, letting the weight of his experience settle. I survived by observing, by listening, by learning the land as if it were alive. Each winter tested me. Each storm taught me more. I learned that survival is never a matter of luck, nor of wishing to live. It is earned, step by step, breath by breath. The woman listened, transfixed. His words carried the resonance of someone who had not only faced death, but had emerged from its shadow tempered and unbroken. She realized that the Apache's calm demeanor, the careful precision of his actions, and his insistence that she not give up were not merely instinct or skill, they were born from a history carved by loss and hard-earned wisdom. You carry that history with you, she said softly. But it doesn't make you bitter. It makes you steady. He nodded slowly, the faintest shadow of a smile crossing his features. Steady, he agreed. Yes, the storm teaches, but it also humbles. It will test anyone who underestimates it. I have seen brave souls falter because they refuse to learn from what came before. You too must carry these lessons with you, not as fear, but as preparation. He leaned closer to the small fire, warming his hands, then gestured for her to do the same. You have learned much already, though you may not see it. You have adapted, persevered, and endured. The knowledge I share is not mine alone, it is part of the land, the people who came before me, and the lessons of every winter that has passed. Respect it, and it will keep you alive. For the first time, she felt the depth of their connection, not just as teacher and student, but as two humans bound by the challenge of survival and the harsh truths of the natural world. She thought of her earlier desperation, the moment she had nearly given up, and realized how far she had come. The storm still raged, but within her, a sense of quiet strength had taken root. Nurtured by his guidance and the stories of resilience born from tragedy, he finally looked at her, eyes steady and unwavering. Tomorrow, the storm may lessen, but the lessons remain. Remember, the blizzard does not define you. How you meet it does. She nodded, absorbing every word, feeling it sink deep into her bones. The fire crackled, the wind howled outside, and the hollow seemed to pulse with the shared history and wisdom that surrounded her. In that moment, she understood that survival was not just physical, it was mental, emotional, and spiritual. And she knew, with a quiet certainty, that under his guidance, she could endure whatever the storm had left to throw at her. The storm began to ease, though the world outside remained a harsh, frozen expanse. The wind had softened to a bitter whisper, and the snow, while still deep, had stopped its relentless assault. Sunlight, weak and pale, pierced through the clouds in jagged streaks, casting long shadows across the snow-covered landscape. For the first time, she could see more than just a swirling white void. The terrain revealed itself, jagged rocks and treacherous slopes hiding beneath the snow, reminding her that danger had not passed, it had only shifted. They prepared to move again, leaving the hollow that had sheltered them for days. She felt both anticipation and fear, her body still aching from frost and fatigue. The Apache watched her closely, his calm eyes assessing her readiness. "This next stretch will test you more than the storm did," he said. "The snow is unstable, the ice hidden, and one misstep could cost you everything." Her chest tightened, but she nodded, determined not to falter. She had survived by learning, adapting, and trusting him. Now she had to prove to herself that she could apply those lessons under pressure. They began the trek, moving carefully across the snow-laden ridge. Every step was deliberate. She watched the way he placed his feet, the subtle shifts in his weight, the constant attention to the terrain. She tried to mimic him, though her movements were slower, more cautious, and tinged with the lingering fear of the storm's cruelty. Then came the test. A narrow, ice-covered ridge stretched before them, a steep drop on one side and a wall of snow on the other. The wind, though gentler, still gusted unpredictably, threatening to knock her off balance. She felt her stomach lurch, her legs trembling with the awareness of how close danger lay. For a fleeting moment, panic gripped her, the old instinct to surrender, to collapse and accept defeat, flickered in her mind. The Apache noticed immediately. His hand shot out, steady and firm, gripping her arm. "Remember," he said, his voice calm but insistent, "not this way. Breathe. Trust what you've learned." Step by step, one foot in front of the other, she focused, forcing her ragged breath into slow, measured inhales. She felt the ice beneath her boots, testing the balance she had honed under his instruction. With his guidance, she shifted her weight deliberately, planting each foot with care, feeling the subtle give of the snow and ice. Her heart pounded, each beat a reminder that this was not just a physical challenge, but a test of the courage and knowledge she had acquired. Halfway across the ridge, a sudden gust threw her off balance. For a moment, she flailed, the world tilting dangerously. He gripped her firmly, pulling her back in line with the ridge, his strength a lifeline against the elements. "Not this way," he repeated, and something in the simplicity of those words steadied her trembling body and racing mind. Step by step, she continued, feeling fear transform into focus, uncertainty into determination. The ridge, once terrifying, became a proving ground. She applied every lesson he had taught her, watching the terrain, feeling the wind, conserving energy, maintaining calm under pressure. Slowly, surely, she reached the end, stepping onto solid ground with a gasp of relief. She turned to look at him, eyes wide with a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. He nodded, dark eyes calm and approving. "You see?" he said. "The storm may test you, the ridge may challenge you, but giving up is never the answer. Survival is about courage, skill, and persistence." Her chest rose and fell with heavy breaths. For the first time since the blizzard began, she felt the full weight of what she had endured and what she had learned. The storm had forced her to confront her fear, her desperation, and her limits. Now, she understood that the turning point was not simply the blizzard easing, but the moment she refused to surrender, trusting in herself and in the guidance that had led her this far, the ridge behind them, the blizzard diminishing. She realized something profound. Survival was not just about reaching safety, it was about mastering fear, adapting to the elements, and embracing the strength that comes from perseverance and trust. The sun broke through the thinning clouds, pale and fragile at first, then growing stronger, scattering the remnants of the blizzard across the frozen landscape. The wind, though still cold, no longer tore through her clothes with the same merciless force. Snow crunched beneath their boots as the woman and the Apache moved steadily forward, leaving the hollow and ridge behind. Each step felt lighter, less burdened by panic and fear, as if the storm itself had been a weight. She had carried and was finally releasing Dot. She looked around at the transformed world. What had been a swirling, chaotic white had become a silent, glittering expanse of snow, ice, and frost-covered trees. The land was still harsh and unwelcoming, but it was no longer deadly. She felt a thrill of awe and relief. She had survived not by chance, not by giving in to despair, but by learning, adapting, and trusting both her instincts and the guidance she had received. The Apache walked beside her with steady, unflinching steps, his dark eyes scanning the terrain for any hidden danger. She noticed how attuned he was to the world around him, reading the subtle shifts in snow and ice, predicting the hidden crevices and weak spots before they even became visible. Every movement he made was precise and deliberate, a stark contrast to the frantic, uncoordinated struggle she had experienced during the storm's first hours. She realized that his calm had become a quiet anchor for her own resolve. As they continued, she began to notice changes in herself. Her breath was steady, her movements more confident. The panic that had once threatened to paralyze her was replaced by awareness and focus. Her hands no longer shook uncontrollably. Her legs, though sore, carried her with renewed strength. The lessons he had taught her, reading the snow, conserving energy, trusting her senses, had become instinctive. She no longer felt like a victim of the storm. She felt like a participant, a survivor capable of navigating the harshest conditions. The bond between them deepened with every step. Though they had spoken little during the trek, the unspoken understanding between them was palpable. She had come to rely on his guidance, not just for survival, but for the reassurance that she was not alone in facing the storm. His patience, his knowledge, and his unwavering calm had taught her more than she could have imagined about resilience and trust. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the land began to slope downward toward a valley. The snow thinned slightly, revealing frozen streams and patches of earth. The blizzard that had seemed endless was now a memory, its power diminished in the brightening light. She paused, taking a deep breath and looking back at the path they had traversed, the ridge, the hollow, the treacherous snowfields. She could scarcely believe she had crossed it alive. The Apache stopped beside her and nodded toward the emerging valley. "We are not yet at the end," he said, his voice calm but carrying an edge of approval. "But you have proven yourself. The storm did not break you. You adapted, you endured, and you survived." She swallowed hard, emotion welling up inside her. Relief, gratitude, and a quiet pride mingled in her chest. For the first time since the blizzard began, she allowed herself to feel the magnitude of what she had accomplished. Survival was no longer a desperate struggle. It was a triumph of will, knowledge, and trust. As they descended into the valley, the snow glinting like crystals in the growing sunlight, she realized that the blizzard had changed her in ways she could not yet fully comprehend. She had faced death and despair, and she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more attuned to the world around her. The storm had tested her limits, and she had exceeded them. She glanced at the Apache, his dark eyes calm, yet carrying an unspoken acknowledgment of her growth. She knew, without words, that this journey had bound them together, not merely as rescuer and rescued, but as companions forged in the harshest crucible of nature. And as they moved forward into the valley, the storm behind them, she understood that this was not just survival, it was transformation. The valley stretched before them, bathed in the pale golden light of late afternoon. Snow still clung to the jagged rocks and the tips of frost-covered trees, but the storm was finally behind them. The air, though cold, was crisp and clear, carrying the scent of pine and the faint warmth of sunlight. The woman took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sharp, invigorating air, and felt a profound sense of relief and clarity. She had survived the blizzard not by chance, not by surrender, but by learning, adapting, and trusting herself. Beside her, the Apache walked with the same calm, measured steps he had maintained throughout their journey. She had come to rely on his presence, not just as a guide but as a steadying force, a reminder that survival was as much about mental and emotional resilience as it was about physical skill. Yet now, she sensed a shift within herself. She no longer needed to cling to his strength as she had in the first hours of the storm. She had discovered her own, forged in the crucible of wind, snow, and fear. They stopped at a small rise overlooking the valley below. The woman gazed out at the landscape, the snow sparkling like a field of diamonds, streams winding like silver ribbons, and distant trees standing like silent sentinels. She realized how much she had changed since the blizzard had first trapped her. She was no longer the panicked, desperate traveler who had considered surrender. She was alert, capable, and resilient, someone who could face the harshest elements and emerge stronger. The Apache turned to her, his dark eyes meeting hers. "You have endured what many would not even attempt," he said quietly. "The storm tested you. It demanded everything you had. But you adapted. You learned. You survived. And in doing so, you have gained something far more valuable than mere safety: knowledge, confidence, and the understanding that surrender is never the answer." She nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. I don't know how to thank you," she said, voice soft but firm. "You didn't just save me. You taught me to survive. You showed me that there's always a way, even when it seems impossible." He gave a faint smile, the first hint of warmth she had seen in days. "The storm teaches, but it does not take. Those who learn from it carry its lessons forward. You will remember this, and you will be stronger for it. That is all the thanks I need." For a moment, they stood in silence, the wind gentle now, whispering through the trees. She felt a quiet sense of completion, a recognition that the ordeal had transformed her. The blizzard had been more than a test of survival. It had been a crucible, shaping her courage, patience, and resilience. The fear that had once threatened to paralyze her had been replaced by focus and determination. The despair she had nearly succumbed to had given way to understanding, and strength died as they began their descent into the valley. She noticed a renewed lightness in her steps. Each movement felt intentional and confident, a stark contrast to the frantic, stumbling motions of the storm's first hours. The landscape, though still challenging, no longer seemed threatening. She felt attuned to it, aware of its dangers and its patterns. Equipped to navigate its challenges with skill and respect, she glanced at the Apache, gratitude and admiration filling her chest. Their journey had begun with desperation and fear, but it had ended in survival, knowledge, and transformation. She understood now that life, like the blizzard, could be relentless and merciless, but it also offered the chance to grow stronger, to endure, and to find a new path forward. The valley stretched endlessly before them, bright, open, and full of possibility. With the storm behind them and the lessons of survival etched into her mind and spirit, she stepped forward into the world anew. She was no longer simply a traveler or a survivor. She was someone who had faced the fury of nature, refused to surrender, and discovered the strength to thrive. And in that moment, she knew that whatever lay ahead, she was ready.